Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. Turkey, as you just heard, is jailing its journalists in apparent attempt at exercising unbridled control over its citizens. Here's a look at how it all began.
Turkey's government began its crackdown on independent critical media outlets with dawn raids on Turkey's largest newspaper, Zaman, and popular national TV network, Samanyolu TV. A total of 31 people, including media personnel, directors, producers, and police officers, were taken into police custody. Ekrem Dumanli, editor-in-chief of Turkey's Zaman, and general manager of the Samanyolu Broadcasting Group, Hidayet Karaca, were among those detained. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation said the suspects were held on charges of establishing, leading, or being a member of a terrorist organization. Thousands of supporters stood in front of Zaman's headquarters chanting, "The free media cannot be silenced. Say stop to unlawfulness," and "We do not fear the cruel." Thousands of Turkish citizens also gathered before the Çağlayan courthouse in Istanbul. The courthouse was surrounded by police barriers as officers stood with 2 water cannons to quell any unrest. The claim of mass detentions was first voiced on Twitter by a user with the pseudonym Fuat Avni. He suggested the Erdogan-led government would detain close to 400 people, including 150 journalists. Avni, who claims he is a whistleblower among President Erdogan's inner circle, divulged the details anonymously.
We're back live on set here at Fresh Outlook. I am joined by the Ebru think tank, Paul Levinson, who is a professor of communications and media studies at Fordham University, Jackie Guzda, a media professor at Western Connecticut University, Dan Freidheim, an educator and diplomat, and joining us via Skype in Prague is Arzu Geybullayeva, a freelance journalist with a main focus on Azerbaijan. Let's begin with you, Arzu. Tell us what your thoughts are on the situation in Turkey right now.
Wow, it's going pretty badly for journalists and for freedom of expression in Turkey. Erdogan calculated very carefully, and he made a very big surprise for media outlets like Zaman and Samanyolu by arresting the journalist and editor-in-chief along with other around 31 people in Turkey. So this has been an incredible, I guess, Christmas present, even though Turkey does not celebrate Christmas, for many journalists and media freedom activists.
All right, let's get back on set here for a second. Paul, we were talking a little bit that this is an issue that is beyond the borders of Turkey. It affects areas of Europe, of course, and it affects the United States. Journalists here are bullied and pressured and ostracized, even by this current administration. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, we have a First Amendment, but unfortunately, all too often, the First Amendment is ignored and trampled. And actually, although the Obama administration has been no great advocate of the First Amendment, from what I've seen, it's more the local governments in terms of protest that just constantly rip up the First Amendment, get in the way of journalists reporting the stories. Here in New York City, it was outrageous during the Occupy Wall Street protest. Hundreds of people were arrested, and their crime was basically reporting on what the demonstrations were going on about. And unfortunately, it takes years for these things to get sorted out in the court. So when these things happen at the time, it creates a chilling effect on journalists.
It's amazing, Jackie, how people blame the messenger, that there's a problem in society and reporters' jobs are to report what's happening, yet the administrations of a county government or a country tend to take it personally and crack down and target that person.
Well, the more that they crack down, the more they can keep those protesters under wraps. That's their biggest fear, is that the people out there are going to, and now with social media, they're going to communicate with each other. They're going to say, let's meet in this specific place. We're going to protest. We're going to take over, as recently, the West Side Highway. That's how these protests are put together now. Not out there in the open, not meeting in a specific spot, but on social media. And so if the government can crack down on that, and perhaps like they did in Turkey, cut down Twitter, these people will not, the protesters will not be able to communicate. And so it's a way to repress the voices of the citizens.
Right. The situation in Turkey is disturbing because it's not even based on real reporting. Apparently there is some type of drama that was aired on television years ago that is offensive to the Erdogan government. So this is striking at free speech on a number of levels. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I just thought we should tie it back into the popularity of some of these democratically elected but not very democratically acting leaders. Again, I think of someone like Putin in Russia. They have very high popularity rates. But we should discount those rates a little bit and say they're built a little bit on a shrinking space for free speech and discussion, and maybe confronted with a more active free press, they wouldn't be quite so popular.
Paula, so you're reacting to what you're saying.
Well, that's a very good point that you made about hearkening back to some earlier nonsensical charge. This is what the authorities always do. They move to silence the journalist, and there's no current reason, no current valid reason to do that, so they reach back and pull something out of a hat. John Lennon, to give an example, in a slightly different context, was denied for years an immigration visa to the United States because he had some kind of pot charge in England from years earlier, having nothing to do with him as a person.
And Michael Savage, who is a conservative talk show host, is not allowed to go to Britain because apparently he said something offensive to that government. So it does happen all the time. Let's go back to our live guest joining us via Skype with her focus on Azerbaijan. And tell me, what is your thoughts, Arzu, on the conversation as we've developed it so far?
Well, I'm really happy that you mentioned how governments are using bogus charges against journalists. But in case of Turkey and in case of Azerbaijan, actually, they don't really have to go too far back. Yes, in Turkey, one of the charges does have to do with the TV series. But Erdogan and Aliyev are quite creative in coming with these very ridiculous bogus charges against journalists. Just an example from Azerbaijan, a journalist that was arrested just about 14 days ago. She's in jail, obviously for her work, but that's not how the government imprisoned her. They put her in jail for inciting someone to suicide. And this is the level of the bogus charges that they're using, both in Turkey and in Azerbaijan.
Arzu, how is the story playing throughout Europe that Turkey is cracking down on its journalists?
Well, it's getting a lot of attention. Obviously, the CPJ report that you've probably seen that came out just 2 days ago, Turkey being among worst countries jailing journalists, and the response has been incredible. A lot of support, a lot of attention, a lot of criticism, including from the EU, but in a way, for Turkey and for Erdogan, really the criticism really is having a very small impact, because as Erdogan came out and said just on Friday that he doesn't really care what EU says, they should just go and mind their own business. So even though the reaction and the response has been tremendous, the result or the consequences of it on behalf of Erdogan and what he's going to do with it is really questioning and actually very alarming.
All right, Arzu, thank you. Jackie, part of the problem I see is that there is a lot of distrust of journalists in general, particularly in this country. You don't find citizens all that supportive. They believe in a free press in concept, but when they see people like James Rosen of Fox News Channel being targeted by the Obama administration, they don't necessarily rally to his cause.
No, they don't, because there's a general feeling amongst people in this country that the media only shows us what they want us to see.
Which is true.
Which is not true.
No, which is true, because you have a board of editors who are deciding what news is, and it's arbitrary, and what's important to one person is not important to another.
Let me tell you a story. I was speaking to someone who was a producer for, I think, 10, 15 years out of Fox News. I'm not the biggest fan of Fox News because it's so polarized, and it is a great percentage of their news I would consider propaganda.
Right. It's not fair and balanced like MSNBC.
Exactly.
Okay.
And MSNBC's business model is based on Fox News' business model, except they don't make as much money as Fox News.
Only CNN is fair and balanced, but that's why they're in last place.
Yes,
I think they're changing their model, unfortunately.
The point being is that people in this country believe that the news is only showing us what they want us to see. So there is this sense of distrust. What they do trust, I'm telling you this because as a college professor I see it, the kids trust what they see online. Now they're cognizant of the fact that there is no editor trying to filter it out. That's the thing. But going back to what I was going to say, this producer at Fox News was saying to me, he said, and I grilled him on this, I said, don't you have some kind of filter where you can only say what Fox wants you to say? He goes, no, that has never happened to me in all these years.
It's implied.
And he said, but.
You know it's going to keep your job.
Yes.
You're not going to go out there and advocate the position that is liberal because you know they're going to crack down on you. It's never said.
He said.
It's unspoken.
You will not get hired at Fox unless you have the proper attitude.
Exactly. Well, they say the same thing's true with policing. The reason why black cops often adopt the values of the white majority is because they're going along to getting along. You've been nodding your head a lot to this, Paul. Tell me your thoughts. And let me refocus it a little bit for you. I find as news becomes more infiltrated with opinion, people trust it less, and that is really hurting our democracy.
That's true.
Well, you know, the golden age of people trusting the news was 50 years ago. Those were the days when the New York Times was considered perfect.
The paper of record.
Exactly. So that's before Jason Blair. And those were the days of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, and Walter Cronkite was the most trusted person in America according to the Gallup poll in whatever it was, 1976. That almost seems laughable now.
I know, and I think we need, go ahead.
But you know what, it's a healthy thing for people to distrust what they hear on the news, and they should look for as many different sources as possible. And absolutely, one of the ways of verifying what you see on the news is go on Twitter, see what people are saying about it. Even though there could be obviously a lot of lies on Twitter, you have so many people looking at the Twitter streams that lies are very, very quickly outed.
Final thought, Jackie, Dan, I'll get to you.
Keep it free, keep it open. We've got to keep working on this. It's a constant power struggle. Those in power want to keep the rest of us down because they're not getting what they want. We need this information. A free and open media is integral to the lifeblood of a country.
Dan.
And news is still about facts. So that recent story about an alleged gang rape that Rolling Stone ran with, all kinds of unconfirmed facts. It wasn't actually social media, it was old-fashioned investigative journalists at the Post who documented the falsehoods.
You need both. You need the feed of YouTube giving you the full press conference, and you need somebody who's been around the block who can analyze it for you in a fair way. I think big-name journalists who are missing now from society are hurting it a little bit because people like Walter Cronkite, his stock in trade was his credibility. People don't care about that anymore. They care about ratings. 10-second final soundbite, Paul.
In defense of Rolling Stone, though, they uncovered a grievous problem on campus, and even though that particular story had problems,
with falsehoods,
they did a very good and important thing, calling attention to rape on campuses.
Let's turn to our live. It was false, at least in some aspects. Arzu, your final thought, a 10-second soundbite from you, please.
I just want to say that, you know, in some countries, you have to understand that people still trust the news and whatever they see on TV because that's where people mostly get their news, like in Azerbaijan, like in Turkey. And yes, while the big majority also trust news that are unedited or go online, like on Twitter and on Facebook and other platforms, still a big chunk of people, both in Turkey and Azerbaijan, rely, and this is why it's very important to have free media in both of these countries for people to get actually objective information.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, Arzu, and of course our hearts and prayers go out to the people, those journalists who have put their lives on the line and are now paying the price by being jailed in Turkey because they sought to bring us some truthful reporting. When we come back, President Barack Obama normalizes relationships with Cuba, turning back the clock 50 years on what could be called a Cold War between the two countries. More on that after this.